Hi all, and welcome to a big day here in American government. We're going to talk about civil rights and the evolution and expansion of rights in this country. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I wanted to discuss is what civil rights are and the differences between civil rights and civil liberties. Civil rights are protections by government power, things government must secure on behalf of its citizens. These are affirmative rights that the government must burn calories on to secure for its citizens. These are things like the right to vote, the right to an education, fair housing policies, etc. These originated as civic rights during colonial times, but the concept of civil rights emerged in the 1760s with the mantra of no taxation without representation. Being represented in Parliament was seen as a right for all British citizens, and if Americans were asked to pay taxes, then they deserved those basic rights as well. Modern-day civil rights have clearly become much more expansive, and we'll talk about that throughout this lecture. The other term is civil liberties. Civil liberties are the Constitution's protections from government power. These are basically things listed in the Bill of Rights and many of the other amendments. The government can't interfere with your religion, can't interfere with your speech, can't force you to quarter soldiers, etc., etc. So, civil rights are the things the government has to protect on your behalf. Civil liberties are the things that you need protection from the government. Keep those definitions in mind as we go forward. So I wanted to start with probably the biggest struggle in our civil rights history, securing the civil rights of African Americans. This was a good test of Madison's ideas on democracy in America, and whether or not majority tyranny would continue to deny the rights of a significant number of people in our country. Throughout America's development, African Americans faced two major structural obstacles in securing their rights. The first was the Constitution itself, which reserved authority to the states on any number of issues, and a separation of powers where each branch was given certain powers, which made coordination difficult, especially on something as controversial as this. The second was people's politics based on people's self-interest. We're a government controlled by men, not angels, which means that we're subject to people's self-interest and desires, making extending rights to others very difficult. We spoke about this a few lectures ago with voting rights, but it's tough to ask people in charge of society to extend power to those who don't have any. While there is a clear moral argument for extending civil rights to African Americans, there is still a practical idea that white people in charge didn't necessarily want to dilute their power. As a side note, you all should spend a few minutes a day reading something from smart minority activists out there. There's a bunch of them on Twitter, Facebook, various news sites if you search around a little bit, and they have a very different perspective than ones you'll typically hear at a fairly non-diverse place like UMW. And by non-diverse, I don't even necessarily mean ethnic diversity, although that's clearly important. I also mean in terms of social class. You don't necessarily have to agree with everything everyone says, but reading people with an open mind and trying to understand how they arrive at their points of view is really interesting, and I think really important to get outside of our bubbles. A quick history of the legislation here. In 1807, Congress passed a law ending the importation of slaves. We were one of the last countries to do this, and it's important to note that we obviously didn't end the practice of slavery, but at least we had stopped treating foreign slaves like corn or sugar or some other commodity that can be imported and traded. Fast forward to 1820, Congress passes the Missouri Compromise, which banned slavery in the northern half of the Louisiana Territory, with the exception of Missouri, and allowed it in the lower half. This was followed 26 years later by the Wilmot Proviso, which said that slavery would not be allowed in any land acquired from Mexico, either in the current war or in any future wars. To be clear, by the current war, I mean the war going on at the time, not some war we're at with Mexico today, just so you're all 100% on board with that.